welcome to our session today. We're going to wait a little bit for some more folks to join us, and then we'll get started. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Hope everyone's been enjoying the session so far. I've been enjoying the learning from other folks in the sector. We're going to get going in just a bit, giving people some more time to join us, and then we'll get going. Going to give it about one more minute here for folks to join us. Thank you for all of you who've joined already. Excited to chat with you today. Okay, see some more folks joining in, so welcome to the session. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thanks for joining us. And Chris, do you want to get going, wait a little longer?
No, yeah, let's get started.
Let's
we'll
do it.
Leave some extra time at the end for questions and answers. A lot of happy faces here, so don't want to disappoint.
Let's get into it. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for joining us. You know, if you're like many of the folks that I've spoken to at Nethope, you've heard from vendors like Twilio how the sky is the limit with how much you can scale and what you can do with technology. But you also have some healthy skepticism because you've ran into legitimate barriers in your organizations adopting and scaling technology, whether that's internal, donor-based, based on the programs, or the fact that often you're trying to build in the middle of a crisis. There's some challenges that you've faced in adopting technology. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you can marry technology, or how you can marry reality with the art of the possible, especially when it comes to delivering personalized aid over digital channels. And I'm really excited to be here today chatting with you. My name is Diana Smith, and I am the Senior Director of Marketing for Twilio.org. And I'm joined today by Christopher Hoffman, the Director of Digital Community Hubs for the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks, Diana. It's great to be here and lovely to be able to sit down and talk with you today.
Awesome. I always enjoy our conversations. So for those of you who are not familiar with Twilio, I'll just give you a quick introduction. We call ourselves a customer engagement platform, and that's some marketing speak. But what that really means is that we help organizations engage and have two-way interactions, conversations with the people they serve, their customers, their community, their donors, over digital channels like SMS, WhatsApp, email, voice, and video. And I'm a part of our social impact team, Twilio.org. Our goal is to help organizations like yours scale your reach and impact with our technology and financial resources. We work with over 9,000 organizations like the Norwegian Refugee Council, and using our technology, organizations today are helping to reach 500 million people over our platform, which is really exciting. In today's session, you're going to learn a couple of things. We're going to cover what NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, has learned launching its digital community hubs. We're going to hear about how they manage demand for cash assistance in the Ukraine crisis when the demand actually outstripped how much they could give away, problem maybe some of you have faced, and also how to build an amazing experience for people who are seeking help in a really traumatic time, and what are some best practices around building that experience. You know, we're going to be doing a Q&A at the end, so feel free to add some questions and some, you know, ideas for us to cover at the end in the chat as they come up. All right, let's enough of the setup here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see Chris a little bit better. Chris, let's start off with hearing more about what the NRC is doing with its digital community hubs. Like, why have you set them up? What's the purpose of these programs?
Absolutely. So NRC recognized when COVID hit that we couldn't stay and deliver in a lot of the places where we were working. And so it was really important for us to look to see how best we could still engage with the people in need. And so we started off kind of at the very baseline of just bulk SMS, kind of getting information out to the people, to tell them what was going on, about a lockdown, about where they could receive medical assistance if they needed it, also behavior change messaging. So just general information out. What we found was, though, over time, that there was a lot of conversations that wanted to happen. People wanted to speak to us, wanted to ask us questions, and we didn't really have the vehicle for that. So right at the onset of COVID, we did a few pilot countries in the bulk SMS and realized quite quickly we needed to move directly into two-way communication. So that took us on this journey of learning, what does two-way communication mean in crisis? How much of it is facilitated or computer or AI driven? How much of it needs to be with a real person? And so we've built out over time, in over 27 countries now, a number of different use cases on a number of different channels. As you say, WhatsApp being one of the main channels that we work with, but SMS, USSD, and phone systems, or IVR. And we've built out now succinct use cases. And that next phase, what we've really been able to do, and where the scale has really come in, is by integrating those use cases into one single pipe. So people now can have a one single entry point with us and then be able to receive either information, have a conversation, register for assistance, and receive assistance all under the same channel. So that's really been the important step we've taken over the last 2 years that's really brought us the scale that we've been trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I think you all have innovated so much and iterated along the way, starting with some countries and growing and taking what you've learned in each context as you build it, and then also building a common platform so that no matter what the next crisis is, you have a starting point to begin with. So I think it's been really interesting to see, and that, you know, so much of this support is coming over digital channels where historically it's been much more face-to-face program-driven interaction. So to set the scene a little bit, tell us what's going on in the overall sector beyond NRC, just what's happening in the areas that you work and in the greater NGO sector that's driving some of these changes to move to digital.
Well, number one is the amount of displacement that's out there, right? The amount of people in need is growing and growing exponentially. And so our ability as humanitarian actors in the field, being able to service those populations in the best way possible, continues to diminish. We can't grow at the scale that actually displacement's growing. So that's been really difficult. So one of the big questions we asked ourselves was, how do we scale further? And so obviously the use of digital tools is one of those ways that you can reach a lot more people in need. I think the big crux that a lot of the industry is trying to deal with right now is how to use digital tools in a meaningful way, how to monitor the impact, how to track your customer experience. How are people experiencing? Is the digital tool that they're engaging with providing them the services that they need and the assistance that they need, the answers that they need? And then lastly, I think one of the big issues that we're seeing out there in our work is, how do we still service those people that don't have access to digital telephony or to a computer or to a website? And so we kind of came to this kind of 70-30 mindset in our work, in that we believe that the digital tools that we're building and the integrations that we're building across many different systems, from cache, different channel uses, simultaneous channel uses at the same time, being able to do all this allows us to hit about 70% of the population that we want to serve. What that does, though, is that releases our staff and gives them the time to access the 30% that don't have access to digital tools. And so it really helps us to have a laser focus on the most vulnerable from a programmatic, traditional, analog way, and then allows us to really engage and service 70% of the population at a higher efficiency rate in terms of time, and a higher efficiency rate in terms of the way that we can engage with them and the iterations that we can have with that person. I mean, it's a lot different being able to engage with somebody over WhatsApp or getting in a vehicle and driving, 50 kilometers or 500 kilometers to where they are, meeting with 10 people. I don't have to meet with 10 people now after 5 days, of traveling back and forth, et cetera. I can actually meet with 5,000 daily. And that's a big change in the way that we work. And the industry sees it. I think there many of my colleagues here that are in this talk today reach out and ask, how are you doing it? We want to do it. We want to get there. So the industry is moving quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I think you touched on so many things. I mean, one of the things we talk about a lot with these digital channels is what about the people who don't have it and marginalizing the disconnected. And I think what NRC is doing of how do we more efficiently speak to the 70% so that we can focus the in-person folks on the 30% makes total sense. And I think one thing that I've learned from you too is that it's not just about scaling and being able to have those 5,000 conversations at once. It's about providing actually a very high level of service and a personalized level of service to each of those individuals that would actually be much harder to do in an analog setting. So let's hear specifically what you have been doing and we're doing in the Ukraine crisis around cash assistance. Tell us about what program you stood up there, and why you chose to focus on specifically cash as assistance rather than other types of support.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple different pieces that puzzle. Number one, you've got mass displacement happening. So how do you get a chance to reach people through mass displacement? And number one is don't try to reach them as much, let them reach you. So first of all, we opened up a channel where people could reach out to us for free. So over WhatsApp, which was our tool of choice for Ukraine and in many other places. So they can just reach out to us over WhatsApp. So we said, okay, this is great. So now how do we create an environment for them to ask us for help? And so we first started off with a needs assessment. So we just said, hey, if you want to reach out to NRC, please reach out to us. Tell us what your needs are. We needed to gather what was going on out there. And we ended up at the end of the first month, I think we had about 20,000 needs assessments that had come in over WhatsApp, which is about 30 questions about what's going on, where they are. From that, we established a complaints and feedback mechanism and linked that together. And then from that, we learned that now that we'd started to raise funds and get things moving, we were able to register people and do it in a very distinct and also a very safe way. So following GDPR, end-to-end encryption, being able to save all of their information behind our firewall to make sure all the information was protected. So we received all this information, and then we were able to, and there's a lot of things in between, but the end, that kind of stage 4 was then being able to distribute people cash over the system. And so that was linking, not to get too technical into the speaks, but bringing in different APIs that allowed us to use financial service providers or FSPs to be able to channel the funds through to them, while at the same time, we were able to run a number of different data pipelines over the information that we were receiving. And these data pipelines, what they allowed us to do was to validate the registrations, to deduplicate the registrations, then to weight the registrations based on vulnerability. So we could immediately target the most vulnerable. And all of this together kind of, for me, comes into kind of, 3 words. Personalization equals dignity. For me, in humanitarian response, our ability to address the distinct needs of a person in crisis is core to what we want to do. And so we are trying to change the way that we work, in ways where we can't use digital means, right? We're going to put food in the truck, take food to somebody, distribute the food to 10,000 people. Everybody gets maize, everybody gets rice, everybody gets pulses, right? Now, through this system, we can identify exactly their distinct needs based on what they've told us, get them the cash that they need to address those needs. And so what we feel is this gives us a great opportunity. And it won't always work everywhere, right? There are certain situations where it's different, but we believe that this mix that we've been able to bring together with the API, the technology integrations, the way that we ask the questions, the way that we run the data pipelines, now gives us an opportunity to get the people the cash that they need to be able to assist them at really a moment's notice. The system can work, obviously with administrative issues and things in between, takes a few days to get them the cash. But in truth, the system is set up to work within seconds. That after that person's vulnerability score has been done, we can transfer money to them and get them the transfer codes and everything. And so it's pretty quick. Yeah.
I mean, I think what you've built is so relevant for so many contexts. What you're talking about, that traditional aid of food, for example, may not be what someone actually wants. People getting, perhaps you've told me before about people getting nets for malaria and mosquito use, and then they sell that. It's like what they really want is to choose for themselves what is needed for their own family and own situation. So cash is a way to do that. And I've pulled up for folks in the audience just a little bit more detail on how NRC is actually building this and what the system looks like. You talked through a lot of things. There was the registration, which is built on a chat bot, mostly over WhatsApp, that gathers this vulnerability assessment. Then there's on the back end some scoring that you're doing, it sounds like, to decide, who really should get this funding. And then there is an integration with an actual money provider that you've chosen to find a way to actually give people the cash. Tell us more about how that you've decided on what channels to use, like why WhatsApp, for example, and which money, like cash providers to use based on the context of Ukraine. And while you're talking about that, I'm going to just quickly share a video to run in the background so folks can see, if I'm someone who's registering, what does the experience look like for me in the chat, just to have in the background so y'all can get a better sense of that.
Awesome. Yeah. And so we are really, for the most part, channel agnostic and FSP agnostic, right? Financial service provider agnostic. What in Ukraine, our ability to scale quickly was because MoneyGram was a chosen provider that we could access instead of having to negotiate with many others. We've since engaged with other kind of financial service provider aggregators that are out there that actually engage with many other ones. That gives us a lot more scale. So that's in that way. For WhatsApp, I mean, we use WhatsApp, number one, because of the security around WhatsApp over the API. So everybody, you need to understand that WhatsApp is not just the WhatsApp that you and I have on our phone. There's the business app, there's API, there's the API. So there's all these different parts, and the API is end-to-end encrypted. So for us, that was a no-brainer. Things like Viber you can use, but you have to choose not to share. So everybody has to go down through the list. And I'm not kidding, the list is about 600 different things that you can check yes or no to in Viber. But the regular one is when you click yes, allow all 600 of those things, your information's being shared. So we have to balance that and make sure that the user has been given the information they need to choose how they want their data to be shared. Telegram, we've really shied away from, to be fair and honest, just due to the lack of encryption that sits over Telegram. Signal is very similar, I would say, to WhatsApp in terms of the encryption, but in terms of the functionalities, in terms of the engagement, Signal is still a bit nascent and growing, and so we haven't engaged quite deeply with them. We do use Facebook Messenger as well, which is great because it allows people that are on the web but might not have a smartphone be able to register, and our system accepts that too. But what's great about Twilio is I've just given you all these names and everything still plugs through Twilio and gives me one data set. So I'm able to get one data set, push that out into my CRM, be able to see everything that's there, what the person is registered, how many people are in their family, what are their ages, ID numbers, whatever other information we've done. And I know that I'm sure many of my colleagues in there are going to be like, well, how are you getting people's banking information, et cetera, through this? Well, number one, that's why we chose MoneyGram to start this off with, because we didn't want to take people's bank information. We're not PCI DSS compliant as an organization, so we can't do that. But what we did decide, which was better, was to identify, again, an aggregator of financial service providers that is PCI DSS compliant. And then through Twilio, we can push over the API with WhatsApp. Then they can open up, put in their banking information. It's stored securely and tokenized, then come back into the flow and continue through the chatbot. So again, it gives us this opportunity to push and pull the information, give access that we need to, but still keep bringing everybody back into the chatbot so that we can get as much information as we can to make the right decisions for them.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, that you're trying to figure out what are the right compliant vendors so that you don't need to own the banking information. And I'm sure that's a question that a lot of fellow NGOs and colleagues out there have on how do you do this in a secure and private way where you are taking like sensitive information on the needs assessment side, at least before the not even the banking thing, but how many people in your family, all of that kind of stuff is fairly sensitive. So knowing how you're doing that with GDPR compliance and what you're trying not to own as data in NRC, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to ping on that for 1 second. I mean, we always garner information in the field as humanitarian actors, right? So we always do registrations. Those registrations will be done sometimes on a tablet. They could be done on a piece of paper. They're done in Excel. They're shared all over the place. We're really still very digitally immature as a sector on getting that right. What this allows us to do is we've done our data protection impact assessments. We've done our data protection assessments itself. How is the data being stored? Where is it going? Who's got it? How long does it sit? What's the GDPR rule? We've been able to look at all of this, and we've really been able to connect these dots along the way. So we really, data protection to us is core to our work because the people we're serving are vulnerable as it is. We don't want to increase their vulnerability. We don't want to do harm. And so we've really worked hard at ensuring that those data questions, because Diana, you've heard me say before, humanitarians are the world's best cynics, right? We are really cynical about everything. But the thing is that we're also like playing a game of telephone, that when somebody else told us that this organization or this tech company or this person shares their data with somebody else, we all believe it. And so until we sit down and actually are able to do our own research and actually dig into it deeply and be able to make really strong strategic decisions on working with tech partners, you're going to always make a mistake, and you're going to always, you're going to miss out on the potential. Like, I'll give one example. Facial recognition. There are opportunities for us to utilize facial recognition through our chatbot, where we could have a person hold up their ID and take a picture of it and then take a selfie, and the system will look at the face, look at the ID, and confirm that Joe is Joe. Okay. We can even go as far as having Joe move his head to show that Joe's alive. Now, none of that data is stored within the API that we would use to do that. All they're storing are the vector points that are there. They confirm it, and all that data is erased. It's not even kept. But yet, the questions that we get are, well, why would we take somebody's face? Why would we do this? Why would we do that? But the reality is, what we can do is actually, we can tick all the boxes to say, we're not going to save that information. We're not going to do this. And the providers will do that. They're very, very, if you have an open conversation with them and tell them, they're going to help you make sure that that data protection is succinct across the board.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you're using, or exploring these other technologies like facial recognition, really to improve the experience for the person who's trying to get this aid. If you have to register with these parties and show that you're there yourself, and also we're seeing use cases where there's multiple people registering for one phone. Maybe there's one phone per family. Some of our other organizations we work with, we've heard of using things like voice biometrics to show that there's different people, but again, in a secure and compliant way. So I think it's good that you're pushing to see, some of these criticisms are fair of technology. Let's address them and see how we can mitigate harm, but what is actually going to be the things that are valuable to the people that we're serving. So just to go back to this Ukraine example, I know that we made it sound very easy. We've got the registration coming in, they're being scored, they're being, assessed, and then the highest vulnerability. But, the reality is that y'all got a lot of people asking for help. Is a very digitally connected population. Basically this number blew up. You got, you can tell the numbers, but way more people than you actually had funding to distribute cash to. So I'd love to hear more about the learnings from that experience, and kind of what you did with the overflow of people that you maybe weren't able to serve.
Yeah, we did get a few more than we were expecting. So we ended up in the first 30 days registering about 650,000 individuals, about 250,000 households, over about 55 million messages.
Wow.
That was definitely more than we were expecting. But I will say this across the board, and every time we've launched one of the digital community hubs, we've never gotten the numbers right. We've always been about 10% of what the reality was in our planning. That communication, it's not about people just registering, right? Once we run them through the data pipeline, we already know who reaches our vulnerability criteria and who doesn't. And so the important part is to reach back out to those people that don't reach the vulnerability criteria and be able to tell them, hey, look, thank you for applying. Unfortunately, you didn't meet the criteria. Let us know if you would like us to share your information with somebody else that might be able to assist you. And we have partnerships with other organizations that took on quite a few of the people that we were not able to serve. But yeah, I mean, in the end, it was way too much. Even the way that we set up the system from a data management standpoint, there was too much information coming in at one time for even the processing to be able to happen. So we moved from writing into a SharePoint Excel to now writing into Azure Blob Storage, and from Azure Blob Storage, we push it through the data pipelines. From the data pipelines, then we do scheduled uploads into the CRM. And that process took us some time to get to, because we'd never had that level of volume. So pushing it into an Excel SharePoint file, was the easiest way to get the data manageable, and then from there put it into Power BI. Now it's at those volumes, we have to do it differently. But now that we know that, we just set it up for success every time. And so now every time we can handle that volume, even if we don't get that volume. But yeah, it was quite a shock. Actually, Twilio picked up the phone and called me on day 2 and said, "We think you've just been spammed because your usage has gone up by like 10,000%." And I said, "I don't think we're gonna." I said, "Well, first check and see, are these distinct phone numbers? What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh goodness, you're not getting spammed. These are actually people writing you. We need to fix it now because there's just too much coming in."
Yeah, and it sounds like you've learned a lot about how you can set it up to, scale actually the system scaling for the storage and the processing, but also making sure you have those vulnerability criteria, needs assessment criteria figured out of how are you going to use the funding that you've gotten, and how can you refer out to partners. So let's hear a bit more about how that referral to partners works and what your vision is. I know you have an interesting vision of what that experience could look like for someone who's calling into one agency and being connected to other agencies.
Absolutely. So kind of what we would call version 3.0 of our journey is around being able to create referral paths. We can already do referral pathways. We already have use cases where we've done this in Libya and in other countries where other agencies come onto our system and are able to see, for example, complaints or a feedback or ask a question relevant to another agency. So an example would be in Libya with UNHCR. So people would call into the system, and if they said that they wanted to talk about resettlement, it would get passed over to UNHCR, and UNHCR would call them back. If they wanted to talk about legal services, we would take that on and be able to do that. But if we take this much larger for the humanitarian sector or a response, for example, where we're operating, if we have a 911, right, for that response or for that emergency, a number where people could call into, agencies would be able to. So if Oxfam is in charge of WASH, and IOM is in charge of shelter, and NRC is in charge of legal services, or whatever it is, or regionally, right, depending on where they choose they are located, you can send them over to that agency so that NRC, for example, in this example, is not looking at all of the data. That actually the data that's relevant to NRC is able to access, and the data that's relevant to Oxfam or to IOM or to whomever else, they access. And that really, those admin distinctions and user distinctions are really, really important and are built into the system. And so what we would really like is, number one, this not to be an NRC tool. This should be a humanitarian tool, and fine if NRC is there because we have the know-how, we can operate it. But if it's in another country and NRC is not operational there, we can teach another organization on how to do this and help them bring this together, teach them about the learnings. And we call that voices. Voices, the idea that, allowing people to have their voice be heard. And that system is growing. We've partnered with people like Cisco. We've partnered with WhatsApp, Twilio, Okta, AWS, Pluralsight. We brought a whole bunch of technology partners together to really make this be a really amazing thing. And we'd love to share it with the rest of the humanitarian community and get it right. IFRC right now, we're piloting in 5 countries with IFRC and looking to scale quite quickly with IFRC using this same tool. So again, we're open to collaboration, very much so, and to testing and to teaching around this, because it does change the paradigm. It flips the paradigm. It's not us deciding what people need, it's people telling us what they need and us being able to provide that.
And that's really what it's all about. I think it's easy for, to say we collaborate in the sector, but it's much harder to get it done. So I think what you're doing makes, is really the leading approach. And thinking about, as someone who, if I try to put myself in the shoes of someone who's in a crisis, who's fleeing their home, who's scared, the ability to just speak to one number, and then based on what's going on with me, I get routed, because I don't really care if it's NRC, if it's IFRC, or who it is. I think about this example, which is not the same, obviously, as these examples in the humanitarian space, but even as a consumer, you call an airline and they're like, hey, you booked this on Delta, you booked this on Expedia, go talk to Expedia. You're just like, oh, hi, I'm Diana again. Like, oh, I'm Diana again. Yes, my flight was delayed. Like, you just keep going over and over and telling people who you are and what you need, and get the ping pong. It's very frustrating, even just in a consumer experience, let alone like when you're in this extremely risky, scary situation when you're trying to rebuild your life on the move. So I think I'm excited about what's going on and what you're driving in that. And I think the other folks who are listening, definitely reach out to Chris if you're interested in collaborating on that.
And a couple of things on the collaboration just to bring up is, number one, we're working now with colleagues at Signpost to be able to integrate and see how our systems can help Signpost proliferate itself. And many of you might know Signpost. But so that means that we can actually work with existing systems and other NGOs and be able to integrate those into ours. So it doesn't mean that you have to change the way that you're doing things. What we're doing is giving a path for you to receive information in an encrypted way so that you can have it. We're also working with the IFRC now on tokenized registration that can be passed from organization to organization. And that's really special for people that are on the move. So now, using that system, you'll be able to be registered in Kakuma refugee camp, travel into South Sudan, and then that same registration information will be available to the partners that have the encryption key to open the token. So there's some really special things going that way. Another thing I wanted to, what you just mentioned, I wanted to put it into humanitarian speak, because we love our acronyms and stuff. So we have this thing called AAP, which is accountability to affected populations. Now imagine if we've got individuals going out into the field collecting information. We have, in many ways, everybody's got a big heart and is doing the right thing, but we really have no way of monitoring that interaction that they're having, right? But now we're putting the accountability back on us. Now this is all data driven. We can actually receive from that person themselves what they need, and we can actually hold ourselves accountable to us not providing it or us providing it, right? And the impact that comes along with that. So it really turns the knob on us as humanitarians in the field to be able to respond to those people that have reached out to us for the assistance that we promised to provide. And I think that accountability level, we've never seen that before in our work. And I think this gives that pathway for accountability and for change in the way that humanitarians work.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because not only are you getting the individual information one-on-one with that person and getting to give them what they need, at the higher level, you can aggregate and learn from a programmatic perspective, okay, where are we seeing the biggest needs? What's changing? What's the biggest things that are happening in an aggregate perspective, using this data and making it transparent to your program teams to continue to iterate the program. So that level of visibility is just so much faster and scalable, like more scalable in that digital environment where you can more quickly get all of that digitized versus getting all the forms from everyone across the world.
Yeah, I mean, and what's great is not only with WhatsApp can we do geolocation, but then we could even ask them. We can get down a number of administrative levels on asking them where they're located, even if they don't provide their geolocation. So it also gives us the opportunity to map this out, to see where the hotspots are. And now following GDPR, we ask them if we can share more information with them later. They can come back, or we can go back to them and say, hey, where are you now? Have you moved? What's going on? And we can actually track the displacement quite easily using these types of tools. which is a lot better than having to go out there and conduct field surveys in camps to understand if people have left or not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet that I want to dig into, and also I want to remind folks who are listening, we're going to go into a Q&A in a bit, so feel free to start adding your questions to the chat. But what I want to talk about is the money, the donors. It's important. It's a big part of what's going on in the humanitarian sector and influencing the work. What could donors be doing to make your life easier to build these systems? You've told me that there's some barriers and ways of requiring your work and your verification of your work that really is part of the reason why all of this is slowing down. What's your ask of donors of what you need to do what you're doing more effectively?
Well, I think they need to drive the conversation, right? Because what technology is right now in many donors' minds is an add-on or is an administrative cost. They don't look at it as a programmatic imperative. And I think the reality is that in the predominance of the services that we provide, and again, this is not a panacea for everything, this is not mental health and psychosocial support and counseling. It can be, but it's not a lot of those analog things that we're really good at doing. But in reality, it is a success factor that they need to factor in to how they look at programs. And so if I was a donor right now, which I'm not, but if I was a donor and I was looking at proposals, one of the questions would be, hey, can some of that be done digitally? How can you reach more people? I want to see the data, right? I don't want scanned copies of a notebook that you filled out. I want to see the data of the conversation that you had with the person to understand, how do we get that data done? I want to put out one thing that we've done in NRC that's really made the difference in our scale, which is we use technology. We say it's an enabler. We don't allow any office to design a project solely based on technology. So you design your program based on the impact that you want to do, and we see how technology can enable that program to reach the impact you want to reach. And that could be ending up being only technology, or it could end up being only 30% technology and just an SMS or a phone call-in center or something else. But you've got to find that mix of the analog and the digital to make it work. And donors need to accept digital costs as programmatic costs, not just as IT purchases and those types of things.
And that's what a lot of organizations we work with also are pushing donors, that it shouldn't be overhead. Like, the way that you're talking about it truly is it's part of the program of the service that you're providing, and how to shift that and have donors lead the conversation. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and not to get too donor heavy on this one, but I mean, the other thing is the nickel and diming on the cost of use, right? Mm-hmm. The thing is that understanding scale with digital communications means that as you talk to more people, your costs go up. They aren't fixed, right? So this mm-hmm. understanding that if I say I'm going to reach 10,000 people with 3-minute phone calls, and I have 30,000 people call me in the first 2 weeks, something we've got to adapt, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not about adapting the technology, because now we've shown that the technology works. It's the donor to come back and say, hey, look, wow, wasn't expecting that. Here's some more money, or I'm going to introduce you to another donor to help you get some more money so that this can keep on going. Because mm-hmm. It's not a fixed meeting with somebody in the field, right?
Yeah.
We're creating conversations. So we're showing that people want to engage with us and they want to talk to us, and they're searching for help and services. And donors have to understand that we cannot dictate how many people call the number. If I'm sending out bulk SMS, yeah, it's easy. I'm sending out 10,000 bulk SMSs, I'm done, but that's mm-hmm. not communication. That's not engaging with somebody. That's just pushing out information. So that's a big shift, is this idea of flexible funding, of crisis modifiers, or even just programmatic modifiers, that mm-hmm. as you get more and more users, there's got to be some money that flows with that so that you can continue the engagement.
Yeah, I was talking with a CIO of another NGO recently, and he was telling me how a lot of the donors that they worked with think about technology costs as like buying a bunch of licenses, or you buy servers and then it's over, and like that's just not how it's working anymore with the scalable of like how much the usage base and how that's changing. It's a very good point. And so one of the things, that we've talked about also, and then I'm going to pass it over to the Q&A. My last question for you is, to build a scale, to build a partner with all these different organizations, you've said that interoperability is really important. And tell us more about what that means and why you feel like building in that way is the best approach for this kind of use case.
Well, because there's just so much technology out there that can really make a difference. And so if you keep going proprietary and single use case technology driven, you're not going to get anywhere because it's going to be obsolete. You've got to get support and everything on that one system. So what we use is an API integrated approach, right? So we start off with something small, what we would call a hub. That's why it's called a digital community hub. We start off with the sprocket, right, which is Twilio at the center where all of our communications come in. Then all these APIs are the spokes that are on the wheel. So we can just keep plugging in all these APIs everywhere. And then what that allows us is the wheel that sits around the hub. It allows us to be able to engage. Those are all the people that we're serving. And some people might need 10 of the APIs in their life, in terms of our service delivery. Some might just need 2. But this gives us that opportunity to do that. And that's why we call it the digital community hubs. And that's kind of the mindset that we use.
I feel like a light just went off, like, oh, the hubs, makes sense. It's all connected. Awesome. Well, I would like to turn it over for a few minutes to the folks in the audience. Please send your questions over chat. I'm seeing a couple come through for Chris or for me. Let's hear from Kunal. They're asking, what broad signals did you use to determine those vulnerability scores? Like, what kinds of questions and score? Tell us more about that scoring bit.
Sure. Well, 2 things to remember when you ask a question digitally. It's not the same as you asking it face to face. So first we had to learn and use human-centered design to understand how best to ask the questions. In the Ukraine response, the questions are really around, were they displaced because of the crisis? Are they with certain levels of vulnerable populations? So are they traveling with children? Are they traveling with the elderly, disabled, etc.? Are they, is it single female headed household? The typical questions that we didn't change the vulnerability of people through a digital system. All we did was ask the questions in a way that people would answer them correctly using a digital format. Now, then those scores, just like we do vulnerability scoring in any response, you look at them and you say, okay, if it's a disabled, female headed household with 3 children that's been displaced and had to move 100 kilometers, that's highly vulnerable. So typical vulnerability mapping and scoring, the same as we do. We just did it at volume and at scale using code to do the weighting and to do the assessment.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you didn't, just to build on that question, one thing we didn't discuss as much was that a lot of this, you started with blasting out messages, then you started with this interaction of learning, having the questions come in and out and doing the assessment on that. We didn't talk too much about, like, when do you actually lift up someone who's in the chat that you've scored as like a super high risk, or someone that actually needs to speak to staff or needs to speak to a human? How does that bit work?
That works over the CRM. So the CRM pings us with different flags depending on what's going on. So you can search and query the CRM. So as all this information's come in and people are in their distinct households, and then it'll tell us, hey, look, you've got really super vulnerable people over here, and we can reach out to them either by phone, right? So we can pick up the phone and call them. We can send them a separate text message, or we can go out and get in the car and go find them, right? So we have a lot of different tools at our disposal to engage. But at scale and at volume, it's easier to engage with them as best as you can digitally at scale than doing it in face to face. But again, like I said, that's why we use the CRM, because the CRM tells us who's really vulnerable, and then we make a decision on how we're going to engage with them.
Based on all the chat data that you'd collected. Yeah, that makes sense. We're seeing some organizations, especially in the mental health space, build a triaging system where they can, based on the answers, like flag if there needs to be not just that automated response for more of the crisis management, not just the registering piece, but afterwards, like who needs to be reached out to first based on those answers. So it seems like, that makes a lot of sense. All right, we've got another question coming in, which is about privacy and security. So what have you done differently to secure the beneficiaries' data? we have heard in different organizations of data breaches and personal information for beneficiaries, putting them at risk. So a security question.
Yeah, no, great one and important. And like I said, that's at the front of our mind in everything that we do. So firstly, organizationally, we put everything behind our firewall, right? And we have different systems and different things that sit there that protect. So every organization obviously should be at the highest security level that it can be. The other thing that we do is we are pushing direct over APIs into where we're going. So this idea of storing data in a number of different places, we really work hard on not doing that. Even if it is stored somewhere else, we limit the time as much as possible for it to be stored in that third party entity. In terms of storage and how long we keep it, are we allowed to keep it, all that stuff, we're GDPR compliant. So we ask them if they will allow us to store their data. We have privacy policy and everything about where their data is stored. So we follow all the GDPR rules to ensure that it's there. But look, nobody is 100% safe. No government is 100% safe, as we hear all the time in terms of the storage. So we use Azure. We use a number of Cisco pieces of hardware as well, relevant to our security at the highest level. So those are the ways that we're protecting the data. The last piece of protecting data is the human factor. So we have very strict user rights from our staff, admin rights across the board. So only certain people are able to see certain bits of the information. Only very, very, very few people have access to the whole kit and caboodle, so to say.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. Any other questions from the audience here that you'd like to hear about this program? Anything else on your mind that's been brought up? I see a question from Gunjan. Hello, Gunjan. In a crisis, you're moving fast. Are there lessons learned when getting funding can be less painful next time, you know, in the middle of a crisis? So like that scalable model.
Yeah, well, again, getting any money in a crisis is something that happens after the crisis. Right. So the idea is to have your systems ready and to understand what the cost of operationalizing those systems are in a crisis, having that ready for the donor. To be frank and honest, it's not expensive to set up what we've set up and to do what we've done. They're one-off costs depending on the use cases. It's the use, number one, that we have to get paid for, right? So in Ukraine, it was quite expensive. We were able to negotiate with a lot of our technology partners for free use of certain systems and things, which was absolutely amazing, from WhatsApp, from Twilio and others. But in the end, if we had to pay for it, we would have had to go to a donor and explain what that cost is, and that's tough. I think the other piece is how you provide support to the builds, which is another cost that's a recurring cost. And what we've done is we've used an outsourced developer called Zing. It's based in the UK. And what Zing does for us is everything that they build, they support. And they are also a Twilio Gold partner, and Twilio is our main, contact center that we use. So having Zing engaging with Twilio, they get the best of the best. They get the best Twilio developers, and we have a great set of developers that we can engage with on a regular basis. And so we can provide support at a very low cost across the world on all the systems that are built, which has been a really good model that we've been able to take forward and test and prove that this idea of not having in-house developers but doing development outsourced is the right way to go about this, from the support angle, versioning angle, and access to growth and scale, because we don't have to try and scale and ask donors for money internally. They do it because they're the business. They scale based on the work that we take to them, and so that's a much easier way to work.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that. If we're not getting any, feel free to share some more questions in the chat, but I'll send one more of a wrap-up question your way, Chris. So there's so much that you've learned in all these different programs. What would you say are kind of the top, 1 to 3 takeaways or lessons learned you'd want to share with with the group here as a summary of what you've learned?
I think the first one is if there are new ways of doing the work that we've been doing traditionally for 70 years, let's try them out, let's test them, let's learn from them, and let's share them together. Places like Nethope are a great opportunity for us to be able to share the different innovations in tech that we're doing. But I think we need to do it more, and I think we need to make not systems for ourselves, but systems for the greater sector. Organizations are really good at making their own systems and holding them really close to their chest, and I think that needs to change. The second thing I think that's really important is that technology is an enabler. Again, our work is really needed in humanitarian settings. People are in need. Sometimes governments aren't able to address the needs of the people that are displaced or in crisis, and that's why humanitarian agencies are there. And so we need to be able to utilize technology in the best way possible to enable us to serve them better, to personalize our services and engage with them. The last thing I would say is for our colleagues in the administration at the higher levels of organizations, which is they really need to understand that you buying a computer in your office is not the same as you setting up a contact center and engaging with people. Procurement for technology in humanitarian agencies needs to change dramatically. They need to understand how technology is licensed, how technology is used, and what capacities you require in your organization to ensure that that technology is used in the best way possible. It's a huge shift, and the highest level of organizations needs to ride that shift, take that shift, and come into the 21st century. Because right now we're still operating what seems to be in 1960 and 1970 in the way that we have all our procurement rules and everything else. So those things really need to change. And if they don't change, we'll be doing the same stuff that we've been doing for 70 years and not being able to serve a quarter of the people that we're supposed to serve.
Thank you for sharing that. I think you have so many relevant lessons learned, especially for folks who are trying to build in digital context for the people supporting them in the organization. I just have a few of the learnings from my end up here. You know, what you shared, especially about personalization being equal to dignity, especially through cash assistance, where if you give someone cash, they can choose for themselves. That to me, you know, it says everything about shifting from let's just give them what we think they need to giving people the choice and the power to choose for themselves. Another takeaway for me was just thinking that you're going to have more demand than you can handle. And so how do you build that into your process? How do you build in scoring and testing and partner sharing into the process ahead of time? And how to work with making sure that you're putting the security and privacy of your the people that you're serving front and center. So those were some of my takeaways. And Chris, it's always wonderful to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time today. For folks in the audience, if you're interested in learning more about what NRC is doing or how you could use digital communications to build your own cash assistance or overall digital programming, we're happy to chat with you at Twilio. We've got a number of sessions here at Nethope. We've got a booth, or you can visit our website. We'd love to chat with you. And of course, if you're interested in being a part of the Voices program, I highly encourage you to reach out to Chris and be a part of that. Chris, any last words from you?
I want to recognize a couple people in the crowd to say thank you, because without them, none of this would have worked. Susan Nesbitt's here from WhatsApp. Gunjan's here from Twilio. Sulin's here from Cisco. I can't see everybody else that's there, but I just want to thank you guys for making this work, because without our technology partners, we wouldn't have been able to scale. Without your openness to engaging in a really succinct partnership ideal, I don't think that this would have gotten legs. So thank you all for all of that. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Thanks so much. We've got a few other sessions from Twilio where you can see more demos of how this technology might actually work if you want to get into the details and see things. So please feel free to check that out. And I think with that, we'll wrap up the session. Thanks everyone for joining us.